The hardest one of these four for me to give up, I went with coffee, clearly, just about every Sunday. I walk up in front of you with my coffee. So, yeah, that's far and away the hardest for me. My wife will attest. If she actually gets up before me, which is rare, she will go make my coffee for me. She's like, I don't want to deal with you before that. So my morning coffee would be the hardest one. But I do understand where everybody's coming from. Like Ryan said, with the cravings, it should be hard to give up. Or like Dave said, man, when everybody around you is eating it, that would be difficult to give it up. So why do I ask this question and force all of you to imagine giving up something that you love? Well, because today Jesus teaches on fasting, which involves giving up food, voluntarily giving up food. Right, I got a boo from the crowd already. I don't know that I've ever gotten Jesus' teaching booed live, so this is a first. Let's write that down. But it's a tough one, right? Like Jesus has a lot of difficult teaching. Fasting can seem like a difficult one, right? Because you have to give up food. A Bible dictionary that I used has a definition of fasting of an act of abstaining from food for religious purposes. All right, so that's just kind of a general definition from a Bible dictionary. So today we will look at fasting in the Bible. All right, Jesus is going to teach on it, but we're going to look at fasting. A couple examples from the Old Testament, one from the New Testament. It was more commonly wrote about in the Old Testament, but it's not absent in the New Testament either. And then we're going to kind of look at where fasting has come to today, because it has similarities to what it was in the Old Testament, but it's also kind of taken on what I think are some different forms. So we're going to look at both of those, and then we'll wrap it up really by hearing about Jesus' teaching on fasting, because we always want to know what Jesus has to say. We're actually going to get to the passage more towards the end when Jesus teaches on fasting, and as we will hear, that passage will sound very familiar to what we've heard the last 2 weeks, because today we are wrapping up our little 3-week mini-series on what's your motivation. We've done giving to the needy, prayer, and now fasting. So we've looked at Jesus' teaching on what is our motivation, where is our heart when we do these three things. So at the very end of today, we'll kind of wrap up all of those three things and tie a nice little bow on that as we go. Little preview as to what's to come for about the next 4 weeks. We're going to take a little break from Sermon on the Mount. So if you're like, all right, I'm done with this, you get a few weeks off. We're going to do a Road to the Cross, kind of an Easter-themed series where we're going to live up the final days of Jesus that will end with Good Friday and Easter. So that will start next week. Yes, that means Easter is coming, which is awesome. Stay tuned for what's going to happen with that. So that will start next week. But today, let's talk fasting. Here is how I would like us to look at fasting. Again, this is another one of those things in the Bible where people have a variety of views on it. But I want us to look at fasting today as a way to approach God. So it's about our approach to God. Fasting is a way to come to God. All right, now, full disclosure, we're all about authenticity here. Geoff is not a guy that has done much fasting in his life. I'll be completely honest. It's not something I grew up with. Haven't done a lot, to be completely honest. So I learned a bunch when I was reading about what it is. I can't honestly say, like, I think I will try to do a fast at some point, but it is not one that I've done a lot of. But we're going to talk about it because Jesus talks about it. Probably because Jesus has been talking to me about it. So let's see what he has to say. Let's look at what the biblical teaching, biblical fasting is. All right, so let's do that first. And again, if you are like me and haven't done much fasting, that's okay, but maybe it's something we will consider going forward or something to look at. All right, so when we talk about fasting, we are going to talk about a voluntary fast. And I want to make that distinction because this is what Jesus teaches on. It is voluntarily fasting. There are other examples in the Bible where people fasted and were not sure if it was voluntary or involuntary. Like there may just not have been food available to them. When Jesus is out for 40 days in the wilderness, we don't know exactly he fasted. We don't know if there's food available or not. So we're going to talk about a voluntary fast, all right? And what these are, a lot of them have to do with a response to a situation in their life. So it's a response to something. It was part of, first, when the Day of Atonement. If you look at Leviticus 16, that whole chapter, it's talking about the Day of Atonement, which is atoning for the sins of the Israelites. Now, a lot goes on with this remembrance and the Day of Atonement, but part of what it was everyone fasted and they rested. The biblical teaching says to deny yourself. So literally, they were voluntarily not eating, and they also rested. They didn't work. They took the other principle of Sabbath, right? And this was in remembrance or response to all the sins of the Israelites and atoning for those. And the point is it was in remembrance or response to something. All right, so that was Leviticus 16. Esther. We studied Esther this fall if you were with us. We took a walk through the book of Esther, how it worked as a story. Well, there's 2 examples in Esther 4 of fasting. All right, so recap of the story quick. Mordecai and Esther, 2 of our main characters, are Jewish people. Esther becomes queen. Mordecai is out in the courts. This nasty dude named Haman doesn't want the Jews around, so he gets the king to approve complete destruction of the Jews. All right, Mordecai gets wind of this, who's a Jewish man out in the courts, and he mourns it. And part of his way of mourning is fasting. We talked about he clothed himself in sackcloth and ashes, and he fasted. All right, Mordecai fasts after learning about the destruction of the Jews. It was a way of mourning, which was in response to this terrible, grievous situation. All right, then later in that chapter, Mordecai gets word to Esther and says, hey, we need your help. We need you to go to the king about this. So Esther asks Mordecai and the Jews to fast on her behalf, fast and pray on her behalf before she goes to King Xerxes for provision. All right, this is provision, but it's still in response to this terrible situation the Jewish people find themselves in. All right, so there's 2 acts there of fasting, both in response to these terrible situation that's going on. And then in Acts 14, we talked about it a little bit. It's less common in the New Testament, but it's still there. Acts 14, Paul and Barnabas were out on missionary journeys. They returned to the church at Antioch, and there were new elders being appointed at the church in Antioch. And one of the ways that they helped commit them in service to the Lord in their new role was they fasted as part of it. It says so in Acts 14. So it's a different situation, but it was still a response to something new. All right, it was a response to this new role, to new leadership in the church. So all 3 of these are a response to something. We have sins in our Day of Atonement, this tragedy, this grievous situation with mourning and provision that comes up in Esther, and then this new role even within the church. Right? These are all different situations where people responded similarly. And I was thinking about that because we can all be in the same situations today and have very different responses. About 2 months ago, we were out for dinner, Stacy and I were, with some friends, and we came home. It was cold, and I turned up our heater. And it was even colder in the house when we got back. So we're like, okay, the heater's probably not working right. It's cold, so we go downstairs and we're looking at it. Now, at this moment is where different responses to the same situation kicks in. Stacy starts looking at the furnace. She calls her dad, who knows about this stuff. Like, I got to call, the furnace company. We're going to figure this thing out. I go to, cool, it's one of the colder nights of the year. I'm going to freeze in my sleep. And we're going to have a whole new furnace put in, which is like, who knows, $10,000, $15,000 that I don't even know where that's going to come from, right? So we responded very, very differently. I sat in my desk chair down there and went into my hole of a person and was like, it's all over. It's done. Forget it. And Stacy's like on the phone with the nice furnace guy, and we're trying to figure out if we need to bring him out that night for an emergency. We didn't. Don't worry. Clearly, we survived. Thankfully, our kids were not at home that night. They were with the grandparents, and we space heater in our room. You don't need the whole story. It got fixed, and we didn't need a whole new furnace. And Jeff survived, thankfully. My wife is shaking her head like, yeah, way to go, dude. Way to be helpful there. The point of that is that was the same situation, and we responded differently. If we look at these biblical examples, these are very different scenarios, yet they all responded with fasting. Fasting and prayer. Fasting goes with prayer. All right? Approaching God in response to this situation involves prayer. We're giving something up. In this case, giving up food is a way of humbling yourself. In essence, making yourself uncomfortable to come to God, because it's recognizing the need for God. By taking away something that we need and then approaching God, recognizing who God is and that God is our God who provides what is needed. All right, so we approach God in response to situations by fasting, making ourselves uncomfortable, recognizing the need and humbling ourselves before God. I think that's one way that I see fasting play out in the Bible. But then fasting today, I think it's changed and it's the same, so it's kind of both. How it happened in the Bible in response to situations, in response to terrible situations like Esther and the Jews in that book, that absolutely still happens and should happen today. There are people that are fasting and praying for Ukraine and Russia right now. That's happening, and it should absolutely still happen. Should fast and pray over these nasty, terrible situations that's happening over pain and hurt and evil and everything going on. So that should absolutely still continue. I think that's part of it. But it's also, I think, changed a little bit. I think fasting is a word that has started to include basically what I would say is still abstaining. So you may have heard people say, I'm doing a social media fast, or an alcohol fast, or a morning latte fast, or a Netflix fast, right? And what they really mean is they're giving that up. They're, in essence, abstaining from that. Now, one of the commentators I read on this draws this really hard line that if you do something like that, you have to call it abstaining, not fasting, because fasting has to be food, has to be in response to a grievous situation. I personally come from the standpoint you can call it either one if you'd like to. Because if you are giving up something like social media or Netflix or your morning latte to get closer to God, I think Jesus' teaching that we're going to hear in a little bit still absolutely applies. All right, so Jesus' teaching is going to work for both of these. So whether we call our social media fast a fast or I'm just giving up social media, if it is for you to get closer to God, Jesus' teaching is going to apply. And I think this type of exercise where you give something up in your life to get more of God is a type of discipline. And it's almost a type of addition by subtraction. All right, I'm going to give you a way that we can see life. Like, remember the Forrest Gump movie, Life is like a box of chocolates? You never know what you're going to get. Here's Jeff's example. Life is like a pot of chili. There's a whole lot of good in it, but let's get more and make it better. I'm going to rephrase that at some point and make that even a little better. But life is a pot of chili. We're going to stick with the life is a pot of chili because that's what's actually in my notes. See, again, this is why Jeff doesn't go off his notes. Life is a pot of chili. I'll put that out there when I finalize that quote because that has potential. Like, that's going on a T-shirt someday. You're right. It's going. So I'm going to ask Ryan to finish that for me. He's better with words than I am. Ryan's an editor for us. But life is a pot of chili. Why did I make that up? Well, here's the thing. What is chili? It is a pot of a lot of stuff all put together, just like our life is. Okay, I make chicken chili. That's my fan of chili, right? So let's go with that. You got your chili, you get your meat, right? Then there's tomatoes, I got peppers, I got mushrooms, I got corn, and a lot of people put beans in their chili, right? And that's a whole different discussion about whether you like beans or not in your chili. But here's what Jeff did, and this is how we're going to say it. I remove the beans from my chili and add more vegetables. The vegetables are really good for me. Now, you can say beans are good for you, that's fine. But I take out the beans and add more of the vegetables because they're really good for me. So I took something out and added more of what is good. That's what's happening when we do these types of fasts or abstaining. Think about this for a second. Let's use social media as our example. All right, many of us are on social media. Let's use it as what we're subtracting. What does getting rid of social media get us? A, time, because we all can attest that social media is a time suck. How much time is spent on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all the other ones I don't even know about, okay? It might also help you get rid of negativity and wrong desires, right? So pull out things that maybe we don't need there. And if we actually add to our relationship with God with that, we take the time that we've saved and we spend that time with God in any form, reading your Bible, through prayer, through worship, right? It's more time with God. God then becomes our desire. We can hear more clearly from God when we're spending that time. It's like we get used to opening our internal God app instead of the Facebook or Instagram app on our phone. All right, so it's taking out something and adding more of something that's good. So whether or not you consider that a traditional fast, it can absolutely be a valuable way to grow your relationship and deepen your relationship with God. And I think Jesus' teaching applies to that as well as to the traditional biblical fast. So let's look at Jesus' teaching. We are going to look at Matthew 6:16 through 18 here. It'll be up on the screen here behind me if you have your Bibles there in front of you. As always, the NIV translation. So let's see what Jesus has to say. Just 3 short verses. Here we go. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to the others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, if you've been listening the last few weeks, maybe this passage sounds very familiar because it is exactly the same formula Jesus takes with giving to the needy and prayer. Basically, don't do it to be seen, because that's what the hypocrites do. If you remember, hypocrites are like actors putting on a show. All right? And they've gotten their reward in full, which is like this gratitude or looking at pleasure from other people, seeing them as awesome. But then Jesus says, do it with the right heart. So again, about fasting, he says, don't do it to be seen. He's getting at the fact that when people fasted, and if they did it, especially for any length of time, giving up food, they may have started to look disheveled. They may have started to look tired or out of sorts. Or if it's a really long fast, who even knows what they might have looked like, right? If you're not eating enough, you can look tired and out of sorts. Now, what the hypocrites, he would say, would do is they would totally embrace this and even enhance it. They would, in essence, make themselves look beat up and tired and exhausted to show, oh, woe is me, look how terrible I look, right? That seems kind of weird. Who wants to make themselves look terrible? Well, the hypocrites did it to show off that they were fasting. Jesus says, A, don't do that. B, take steps against it. The whole putting the oil on the head, washing your face is like, hey, clean yourself up. Make yourself look like you do every day, however that makes you dress. Now, for me, that would be easy. That means putting on my hoodie and my sweatpants 6 days a week, all right? I don't dress like this every day. This is my special Sunday best, all right? But it would be putting yourself together like you would, because fasting as an approach to God is a heart issue. God is the only one who needs to know you are fasting. We are in the season of Lent, where a lot of people give things up for Lent. This was a fun time to work at a coffee shop. It really was. I worked at a coffee shop for a number of years. I will share stories from it because, man, looking back, sermon illustrations all over the place from working there. You're almost like, similar to a bartender, you're almost like a psychologist at times because people will just tell you things, whether you want to know them or not. But I worked at a coffee shop, and we had a lot of our business through a drive-thru. We had a drive-up window, and that was a lot of fun because you'd get to know cars. So, like, I would look down and see a car coming and be like, oh, that's this drink, that's this drink. A lot of customers we knew that way. So we had one pull up one day. It was this woman. Drove a fairly nice car. She was always a very well put together, done up nicely, dressed nicely. She had some sort, I don't know what she did for a job, but she was definitely an important looking job at least. Put together, great, awesome customer. All right, and she always got her morning mocha. I'm like, okay, so we start to make it one morning. She says, no, stop. I'm like, what, why? I gave up my mocha for Lent. I'm like, oh, all right, I guess that happens. She's like, I need a gunpowder tea. It's like, interesting change, but okay. Cool, that's fine. So we do that. She goes, whatever. Next day she comes up, same thing. Oh, hey, I need that gunpowder tea. I gave up the mocha for Lent. I know you told me yesterday. I was there like every day. Yeah, you told me yesterday. Okay, oh gosh, I can't believe I gave up my mocha for Lent. Yeah, okay, here's your tea. Wednesday, again, Thursday. No joke, by Friday, this woman looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. She was not done up and put together like she usually is. Maybe she didn't work that day, I don't know. And she's like, oh, Geoff, I gave up my mocha for Lent, and I have to have a gunpowder tea. And in my head, I'm like, gosh, I know. I get it. I've been here every day. And I'm like, I can't remember her name. I'm like, I know. I'm so sorry, but good for you. You keep going. Here's that tea. You can do it only how many ever days left. She had to tell us every day she gave it up for Lent. Literally, she saw me every morning about the same time. I knew it, but she felt like she had to explain it and put it out there and be like, I'm doing it now. Good for her for giving it up, and she held to it. All right, she held to it, and that's good for her. But she didn't need to show it off. That's the point. That's what Jesus would be getting at. Don't show off that you're fasting, or don't show off your discomfort. If you're doing, again, let's go back to our social media fast. Don't text your whole crew and be like, hey, everybody, I'm off of social media, so if you can just text me all those articles, that'd be great because I can't see them on Facebook. Or, oh, here's all my pictures. You guys need to see it. You can like it here because you can like and text now, right? You don't have to do it on Facebook. Jesus would say, no, don't do that because it's for you and God. All right? It's between you and God. Like prayer, we talked about last week, it is an upwards thing, not an outwards thing. We see it as an approach to God. Other people don't need to know that you're giving it up. They can. All right, it's like all these. They can know, and that's okay if they know, but it's where is your heart when you do it? Where are you pointing when you do it? If you are pointing outwards for all these people to see it, that's where Jesus is cautioning against and saying, don't do it for that. If they just see it, but you're still focused on God, then so be it. Great. They see you exercising a great discipline with God. And that's what I think Jesus' teaching is about. And it's really been that way these last 3 weeks because it's been all about our motivation behind giving to the needy, behind prayer, behind fasting, these actions that help us live rightly for God, live righteous lives. They're all things that Jesus knows we're going to do, all things he wants us to do, but he's saying it is for God, not for anybody else. Right? You don't need to impress anybody else. God is the one that wants us to do it. God is the only one that needs to see us do it. Doing it for others to see it just means we're putting on a show. That's, again, with the whole hypocrites thing. Or if we think back a few weeks, hypocrites were like actors. All right, they were just putting on a show. Now, you might be thinking, but man, I want people to see Jesus through me. So do I. So do I. Now, people can still see Jesus through us without us doing things for them to see. Hey, you can talk about Jesus with people still. All right? You can share Jesus with them. However, I think it's even more impactful when others just see Jesus through us without us trying to make it about them. And this is something that God has put in my heart over the last year or so. It's that they just want to see us live out a Christian life. There's a song lyric, one of the songs that plays before service, has a lyric that says, people don't care if you keep Christ in your Christmas if they cannot see that there's Christ in the Christian. All right? They want to see Christ lived out in our lives. I think that's more important than what we say. All right? God will show people himself through you if you just live for him. Because God works in some super dope ways because he can shine his light through us even when we don't realize we're shining it. We can just follow God. That's turning on the light, is just living for God. He will show the people that need to see him through that. If we just focus on him, we have to worry about that. God will take care of that part. If we live for him, focus on him, make God our motivation, he'll make sure the people that need to see him do. Because if we make other people our motivation, that's going to fade. What we get from that is going to fade. But God won't. He can do it through us without us feeling like we have to force the issue and force him on other people. I don't think we have to do that. By just living for him, with God as our motivation, other people will see that. Serving God, worshiping God, living for God, being about God should be our motivation as Christians. So I think if we were to answer the question of this mini-series, what's your motivation? It's God. And it's serving God and it's living for God. And I believe that's what Jesus is teaching in these 3 weeks that we just ran through. So let's pray that way this morning. God, we pray that you would just be our motivation. God, that it would be upwards first, God, that when we're doing anything, it would just be for you, whether we're giving to others, whether we're praying, whether we're fasting, or God, whatever else we're doing, that would be just focused on you first, and that we would remember, God, that you're so powerful and so incredible that other people will see you through us, and that you control that if we just grow our relationships with you, we help each other grow relationships with you, that you will help other people see you, and that they can see you through us just with how we live when we're focused on you. So God, I pray that this week our motivation would be you. It would be to serve you, to live for you, and to worship you. God, that would be behind what we're doing. And God, I pray that if any of us are giving things up, whether it's a traditional fast for something, God, with food, or it's anything else, that it would be a way of approaching you, that we would humble ourselves before you, God. We would recognize our need for you, and that we would come to you in a humble way and in a way of wanting to serve you and grow closer to you, God. I pray this in your name. Amen.